mid-1990s, Michigan. In an affluent suburb of Michigan, the Brown family mansion stood as a symbol of success and happiness. With its pristine white walls, meticulously manicured lawn, and luxury cars parked in the driveway, everything appeared perfect. "Sarah, that dress is lovely," Diane Brown exclaimed, admiring her 12-year-old daughter in the living room. "Thank you, Mom. Daddy bought it for me," Sarah replied, beaming. The scene of the former model mother and her beautiful daughter was like a reflection in a mirror. Diane's long blonde hair and refined features, coupled with Sarah's radiant blue eyes, made them look as if they had stepped out of a fashion magazine. 10-year-old Emily watched silently from the corner of the sofa. Her arms and neck bore the raw, red marks of severe eczema. She gritted her teeth, trying to resist the urge to scratch. "Emily, are you scratching again?" Diane's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp. "I'm sorry, Mom, but it's so itchy." Emily's words were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. "Daddy's home!" Sarah cried out joyfully. John Brown entered the room, his suit impeccable, his smile wide. He exuded the authority of a successful businessman. "How about that, Sarah? Today's presentation was a huge success." "As expected, Daddy," Sarah exclaimed. John lifted Sarah and spun her around, their laughter filling the room. The light from the expensive chandelier illuminated their happy faces. Emily quietly stood up and approached her father, a faint hope in her heart. "Welcome home, Dad," she said softly. But John's eyes never left Sarah. It was as if Emily were invisible. "Oh, Emily." "Right, welcome home," he said dismissively before heading to his study, the sound of his expensive leather shoes echoing in the hallway. Emily felt the sting of exclusion from her family circle. She gazed at her reflection in the large mirror, her red, swollen skin and dry, flaky hands, and sighed deeply. The girl in the mirror seemed to belong to another world entirely. That night, Emily sat alone in her room, applying ointment to her skin. She winced each time the cold cream touched her raw skin. From the next room, she could hear Sarah playing Chopin's Nocturne on the piano. The elegant melody only emphasized Emily's loneliness. "Why just me?" Emily whispered, fighting back tears as she endured the itching. Day after day, her yearning for her family's love went unfulfilled, slowly eroding her spirit. Outside her window, the full moon shone brightly, a silent witness to Emily's solitude. A rainy Saturday afternoon. Gray clouds hung low, releasing a fine mist over the Brown family's expansive garden. An old stone well stood silently, its moss-covered walls and rusted pulley telling of its long history. "Emily, come here for a moment," John's voice cut through the sound of rain. Emily approached cautiously. Her parents and Sarah stood around the well, unnatural smiles on their faces. "This well has special powers," John said, smiling gently. But there was an eerie light in his eyes. "If you go inside, your eczema will be cured." Emily's eyes lit up with hope. The possibility of being free from the eczema that had tormented her for so long seemed like a dream. "Really, Emily's voice trembled. Yes, Emily, Diane continued, her voice as sweet as honey. Go on, climb down. As Emily hesitated, John pushed her forcefully from behind. Emily screamed as she tumbled into the dark well. There was a splash of cold water, and she found herself enveloped in darkness. Dad! Mom! Help me! Emily's screams echoed from the bottom of the well. Her body shook with fear and cold. But her parents just peered into the well with cold expressions. This should cure your eczema, John's cruel words mixed with the sound of rain. His voice dripped with the disgust he had hidden for so long. Sarah trembled. Her sister's screams and her parents' cruelty, it all seemed unreal. Her mind went blank. Dad, please help Emily. Sarah cried out desperately. Be quiet, Sarah, Diane said sternly, her eyes as cold as ice. This is a family matter. Emily's cries gradually weakened. In the cold water and darkness, she was losing consciousness. Sarah felt overwhelmed by helplessness. She couldn't stop her parents. She couldn't save her sister. Guilt squeezed her heart. Suddenly, a strong voice cut through the rain. What on earth are you doing? It was Mrs. Grace from next door, running towards them. Her eyes blazed with anger. Mrs. Grace quickly assessed the situation and called down into the well. Emily! Are you all right? I'll get you out right away. Her voice was filled with strong determination. Mrs. Grace acted swiftly, using a nearby rope to lower herself into the well. The sound of the rope scraping against the well's edge heightened the tension. A few minutes later, she emerged cradling a soaking wet Emily. Emily's lips were blue, her body cold. But her faint breathing showed she was still alive. Are you out of your minds? Mrs. Grace's voice shook with anger as she berated the parents. Her eyes burned with fury. Emily shivered from cold and fear. Mrs. Grace held her close, whispering in her ear. Her voice enveloped Emily like a warm blanket. It's okay, Emily. You're a strong girl. One day, they'll regret this. Those words lit a small flame of hope in Emily's heart. Though the rain continued to fall, the world around Emily seemed to brighten just a little. At Mrs. Grace's home. In the warm, sunlit living room of Mrs. Grace's house, Emily sat quietly. The walls were covered in cheerful wallpaper, and colorful flowers bloomed on the windowsill. It was a stark contrast to the cold atmosphere of the Brown household. Emily, here's some tea, Mrs. Grace said gently, holding out a steaming cup. Emily nodded slightly and took the warm cup in both hands. Thank you. Aunt Grace, she said softly. Mrs. Grace's face lit up at those words. Her eyes shone with affection. You're welcome, dear, she replied. A quiet bond of trust was beginning to form between them. Though Emily's skin was still red and irritated, her expression was gradually regaining a sense of peace. Mrs. Grace gently stroked Emily's hair. Emily, from now on, this is your home. You can relax here. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. The love she had sought for so long, it was here. Meanwhile, at the Brown house. "Sarah, how was your violin lesson today?" Diane asked Sarah in the living room, surrounded by expensive paintings and ornaments. Despite the luxury, the atmosphere in the room was heavy and oppressive. Sarah answered expressionlessly, "Fine. Fine isn't good enough. You're a special child." Diane's voice was tinged with impatience. Sarah remained silent, staring out the window at the garden where she used to play with Emily. A lonely swing swayed in the wind, unused. "I wonder how Emily is doing," Sarah murmured. Diane's expression clouded at Sarah's words. "Forget about that girl. You have a bright future ahead of you." Sarah closed her eyes painfully at those words. She felt crushed between her guilt as a sister and the weight of her parents' expectations. Something deep in her heart seemed to crack. That night, Sarah sat in her room, staring at a photo of Emily. It was a picture from a few years ago, showing the two sisters hugging and smiling. She gently traced the photo with her finger. "I'm sorry, Emily." A tear fell. In Sarah's heart, the bond between sisters still burned quietly. Outside, the night wind rustled through the trees, making a mournful sound. At Mrs. Grace's house, Emily had just fallen asleep. Her sleeping face was peaceful. She seemed to be sleeping soundly for the first time in a long while. Mrs. Grace quietly closed the door. "I want that child to be happy," she whispered into the quiet night. Late 1990s, a high school in Michigan. In the hallway, 17-year-old Sarah Brown was always surrounded by a crowd. Her beauty and talent were the talk of the school. "Sarah, you're definitely going to win the next competition." "Thank you. But I still need more practice," Sarah replied modestly, though her expression was confident. However, her eyes held a certain emptiness. Behind her glorious success, her heart was plagued by a sense of hollowness. After school, in the music room, Sarah was engrossed in violin practice. The melody was beautiful, but somehow sad. "Sarah, that was a wonderful performance," said Mr. Johnson, the music teacher. "Thank you," Sarah replied flatly. Her voice lacked the passion it once had. "But something seems to be missing, as if your heart isn't in it," Mr. Johnson observed. Sarah started at his words. I may have lost something," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. Meanwhile, at Mrs. Grace's house, Emily was intensely focused on her research. Around her were scattered herbs and cosmetic ingredients. "Emily, are you trying a new formula again?" Mrs. Grace asked with interest. "Yes, I'm researching natural ingredients that are effective for eczema," Emily replied, her eyes full of determination. "I want to help people who have the same struggles I did." Mrs. Grace smiled gently at Emily's words. "Your kindness will surely save many people." Emily continued her work silently. She looked like a completely different person from the fragile girl of 5 years ago. The eczema on her arms wasn't completely healed, but it was much better than before. I hope this works, Emily said, picking up a new cream. At that moment, a tear rolled down her cheek. Sarah, I wish you could use this too. As she whispered her sister's name, Emily immersed herself in her research once again. Outside the window, the setting sun painted the sky red, as if symbolizing Emily's passion. In the city center, John and Diane were dining at an upscale restaurant. How is Sarah doing? John asked. His voice lacked the warmth of a father concerned for his daughter. She's been a bit down lately. But don't worry, I'll make sure she stays on track, Diane replied. John nodded indifferently. I see. She's the pride of our family. Make sure she doesn't disappoint us. Their conversation sounded more like a business discussion. It had completely lost the warmth of a family. As night fell, Sarah and Emily were each beginning to walk their own paths. An invisible thread still connected them. Would that thread one day bring them back together? Early 2000s, a family home in Michigan. A family was gathered in front of the television, watching the local morning news. And now, we have a special feature on a noteworthy young entrepreneur. The announcer's voice cut through the quiet morning air. The screen changed to show Emily. She was confidently explaining her company's eczema care products. Our products are committed to natural ingredients, pursuing a formula that's gentle on the skin of those suffering from eczema. Emily's voice was strong and persuasive. She bore no resemblance to the timid girl she once was. We interviewed Emily Brown, CEO of Phoenix Skin Care, the announcer continued. At those words, the Brown family's living room froze. Emily, Diane whispered in a trembling voice. John stared at the screen in silence. His eyes reflected surprise, regret, and something else. Our goal is to give hope to all people suffering from eczema. Emily's words struck the Brown household like a thunderbolt. Sarah watched the TV with a complex expression. Should she be genuinely happy for her sister's success, or feel depressed comparing it to her own situation? Her emotions were in turmoil. Emily, amazing, Sarah said, tears glistening in her eyes. Suddenly, John stood up. We need to contact her, he said urgently. Diane hurriedly tried to stop him. Wait, John. How? I don't care. Find her. John's voice was a mix of impatience and desire. The living room phone began to ring. The display showed unknown. John picked up the receiver. Hello, Brown residence. It's been a long time, Father. It was Emily's voice. John's face turned pale. Emily, you. It's been 5 years, hasn't it? You saw the TV, I suppose. Emily's voice was calm, but underneath, a whirlpool of emotions was churning. Yes. I saw. You've done well for yourself. John's voice trembled. What do you want? Emily's question was met with a moment of silence. You, no, I want to see you. We need to talk. Sarah and Diane listened to John's conversation with bated breath. The atmosphere in the room became tense. "All right. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. At my office." Emily's voice was filled with determination. The call ended. John stared blankly at the receiver. "What are you going to do, Dad?" Sarah asked. John couldn't answer. Outside the window, birds were singing their morning song. But the Brown family had no room to feel the arrival of spring. After 5 years, the time for a fateful encounter was approaching. Phoenix Skincare Office. The CEO's office on the top floor of a high-rise building was enveloped in silence, shutting out the bustle of the city. The large windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Emily took a deep breath, facing her heavy wooden desk. The clock struck 2 p.m. A knock on the door. "Come in," Emily's voice was surprisingly calm. The door opened, and John, Diane, and Sarah entered. The air in the room froze at this encounter after 5 years. "It's been a while." "Emily," John's voice trembled slightly. Emily stood up and faced the three. Her presence exuded the dignity of a confident young CEO, with no trace of the timid girl she once was. "Please, sit down," Emily gestured to 3 chairs. After a moment of silence, John spoke. "Emily, we heard about your success." "Let's get to the point," Emily calmly interrupted. "Why did you come here?" John and Diane exchanged glances. Then Diane forced out her words. "Emily, we want you back." Emily's eyes flashed sharply at those words. "Take me back. You're the ones who threw me into a well 5 years ago." John hastily began to make excuses. "That time, it was a mistake. Now that I have value to you." Emily's words cut like a sharp blade. "No. Diane's words trailed off. Emily slowly stood up. "You're after money, aren't you?" John and Diane's expressions froze. Emily gave a cold laugh at their reaction. "As I expected. But unfortunately." Emily took out a document from her desk drawer. "This is a pledge to donate all my assets to organizations supporting eczema patients. It's already been notarized." The color drained from John and Diane's faces. "In other words, I have no money to give you. And you have no right to receive it." Emily's words were met with silence. At that moment, Sarah stepped forward. "Emily, Emily's expression softened slightly. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I couldn't help you then." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. Emily quietly approached Sarah. "Sarah, you were a victim too." The two embraced wordlessly, as if trying to bridge the 5-year gap. John and Diane watched the two in a daze. Now then, Emily's expression turned cold again. "Please leave. Don't ever appear before me again." "Wait!" John shouted. give us a chance. A chance? Emily's voice resonated low. Can you imagine how much despair I felt in that well? John and Diane were at a loss for words. You have plenty of time to regret. Goodbye. Emily's words carried the weight of a final judgment. John and Diane left the room with slumped shoulders. Sarah turned back to Emily one last time and said, "Can we meet again?" Emily nodded slightly. Yes, definitely. The door closed. Emily stood by the window, looking down at the city. Her eyes held a light of determination. Her future life would be not only for herself but for those who suffer. Emily made this vow to herself. Autumn 2005, Michigan. A large crowd had gathered in front of the Phoenix Skincare headquarters building. Welcome to Phoenix Skincare's 5th anniversary celebration event, Emily's voice resonated through the microphone. Now 29 years old, Emily surveyed the audience with a confident expression. Her appearance showed no trace of the timid girl she once was. Our company is not just a profit-seeking enterprise. Our mission is to give hope to all those suffering from eczema. The audience erupted in applause. After the event, Emily took a moment to relax in her office. Her secretary brought in a letter. "Ms. Brown, it's from Sarah." Emily quietly opened the envelope. "Dear Emily, I've started walking my own path now. Free from our parents' expectations, I've found what I truly want to do. I'm teaching music to children. Your courage gave me the strength to live. Thank you. I look forward to the day we can perform together. With love, Sarah." A gentle smile spread across Emily's face. "Sarah, I'm glad." She looked out the window. The autumn sunset was bathing the city in a warm glow. That night, Emily was quietly gazing at the starry sky from her home terrace. "Aunt Grace, are you watching over me?" Mrs. Grace had passed away 2 years ago. Her last words echoed in Emily's ears. "You're a strong girl, Emily. But strength isn't everything. Don't forget to be kind too." Emily took a deep breath. She placed her hand on her chest, feeling her own heartbeat. "I will continue my journey. For those who suffer. And, for myself." From afar, she heard the phone ringing. Emily returned to the living room and picked up the receiver. "Hello, this is Emily." "Emily." It was Sarah's voice. "Sarah. What's wrong? I'm sorry for calling at this hour. But I wanted to see you." Sarah's voice was trembling. Emily hesitated for a moment, but quickly made up her mind. "I understand. I'll come right away." 30 minutes later, they were sitting on a park bench. The moonlight gently illuminated their figures. "Do you think you can forgive our parents?" Sarah asked tentatively. Emily exhaled deeply. "Forgiving and forgetting are two different things. But I won't let them control me anymore." Sarah nodded silently. "What about you, Sarah?" "Me, I've become free. Emily, it's thanks to you. The two sisters leaned against each other quietly. The wounds of the past weren't completely healed yet, but they had certainly taken a step towards a new future. Hey, Emily. Our story isn't over yet, is it? Emily smiled gently. No, it's only just begun. In the night sky, a new star began to shine. It was like a light of hope illuminating their future. Emily and Sarah stood up, holding hands. Before them lay an unknown future. It might be full of challenges, but together, they could overcome anything. Well then, shall we go? Emily's voice broke the night's silence. Yes, together, Sarah replied. Their steps were light yet strong. Overcoming the past and stepping into the future. This was the beginning of Emily and Sarah's new story.